Tucked in the mountains of western North Carolina is the small town of Saluda. Chartered in 1881, bolstered by a fierce determination to build a rail line that seemed almost impossible to build, and nurtured by small-town charm and community spirit, Saluda has endured with some well-kept traditions. Among them, and the focal point of this documentary, are music and dance. Many of these traditions, like the trains coming up the Saluda grade, almost disappeared completely. But with the new millennium has come a revitalized presence of local businesses, gathering places, and music. We'll get to know the primary styles of music that have taken root here. Fiddle music, including fiddle makers of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Old-time jams that are defined by and inspired by the surrounding mountains. A gospel music tradition that, with a little divine inspiration, has been shared far and wide. Square dancing, one of Saluda's most defining traditions that drew people from throughout western North Carolina and beyond for much of the 20th century. And the singers and songwriters of today's growing Americana genre, part of Saluda's turn of this century's downtown revival. Long before the Asheville and Spartanburg Railroad first came roaring triumphantly up the Saluda grade in 1878, music and dance traditions were thriving in what was then called Pace's Gap, named for the Pace family, early settlers in the area. As the town grew to accommodate the influx of the railroad crews and passengers, so did progress. And so did the mix of emotions from the mountain people who had long coexisted in these hills since the Treaty of 1777 moved the Cherokee out of the region. With the trains came diversity and an introduction of cultures both far and near. Oral histories collected have relayed fascinating stories of days gone by, where the excitement of old-time bands were the hallmark of square dance celebrations as couples whirled about the dance floors and callers shouted out the next dance steps. Even after the train roared to the top of the grade, bringing newcomers and tourists into the town, all were welcomed at the dances, and differences were, for a time, forgotten. What attracted people to the area in the 19th and early 20th centuries? There's the ozone-rich fresh air, thanks to its unique geographical features. It inspired the construction of 2 popular baby hospitals near downtown, with large annual summer pediatric seminars, and an increase in Saluda's already established square dance tradition. More than 4,000 babies were treated during its 40 years of operation, dubbing Saluda the baby capital of the South. And there's the railroad that provided access to it. Making the steep climb of the Saluda grade was an engineering marvel. To this day, it's the steepest standard gauge mainline railway grade in the country. The railway and its depot became the symbol of Saluda.
Depot is a landmark. It's kind of an icon that says, hey, people actually built something. There was an engineering amazing thing, and people came here, lived, fell in love with the community, the area, the mountains around here. The geography of Saluda. Because of that grade, we sit up on top of this mountain, this rock cliff, and we're right above the flatlands, the isothermal belt. So when the winds blow across that flatter area and hits our rock, it oxidizes our oxygen and turns it into a good ozone. Come to Saluda, and a lot of people say, I really feel good when I come to Saluda. And it's because of the air.
Since 2010, the Historic Saluda Committee has been collecting oral histories. We knew early on that we would eventually do a film documentary about music. It became apparent during these oral histories that music was a favorite topic. You see, Saluda has a long, rich tradition of musical celebrations, and many of those celebrations go back long before the town was even founded. We hope in this film documentary that we'll showcase some of that history for you. Saluda is a magical and enchanted place to be, full of song and celebration. As a child, I was only fortunate enough to live in Saluda for a short while before my family moved to Charlotte. My dad, Joe Stevenson, was a member of the last generation of our family to grow up there. However, our roots run very deep, especially on the Pace side of our family, who arrived in the area as early as the 1800s. Fortunately, Charlotte was not that far away, so we traveled back frequently to visit my grandparents, Kathleen and Raymond Stevenson. In those days, the only way up the mountain was on Highway 176, and it seemed to me that as soon as we hit the foot of the mountain and started climbing up those curvy roads, the music would just get louder and louder in my head. Kathleen was a very talented lady. She was quite the accomplished pianist. She preferred contemporary and classical music, and her preferred genre was ragtime. Her favorite composer was Scott Joplin. My grandmother played music for her church and at many social gatherings. She also taught piano lessons to many folks in Saluda. Today she is still remembered for sharing her skills. Today when I travel to Saluda, lots of musical memories fill my head. Though I prefer contemporary bluegrass and Americana, the musical memories from the past will always be there as well.
Saluda town is built on the farm of Cornelius Pace, and his heirs didn't do anything to settle the estate. And then the railroad came through here, and all of a sudden the heirs came out of the woodwork all the way to Austin, Texas and back. One of the ladies in Austin, Texas wrote the court here in Henderson, "I'm so sorry to hear that grandfather has died. He had been dead over 20 years. They got in a lawsuit and it lasted about 20 years. Finally, they divided all this property up into city lots. Now that's stretching it because some tracts had 10, 12, and 16 acres. And they had a public auction. And I'm sure Smith Hill was in that auction, because Dr. Gillette bought his property at that auction sale and built what was now the Saluda Inn. And when Saluda was first incorporated, half of it was in Henderson County and half of it was in Polk County. So that went on for a few years. Then the legislature decided to put all of it in Polk County. Although most of the people lived outside the city limits, most of the people still lived in Henderson. The county line ran in front of Dr. Gillette's house. See, the railroad built the railroad through here. They didn't have to have a right-of-way, they took it. That was part of the deal to get a railroad. they could take the land, eminent domain. And they put the railroad through, and then they let it be known that they wanted to build a railroad town here. They were going to keep the gang, the road gang, to maintain the railroad. Then they had the 3 shifts at the depot, had 3 shifts at each one of the safety tracks. You know what a safety track is? When the train started running away, they gave a signal, and the switchman would throw it up the mountain.
Daddy said that whenever the first train came up, he was a guard on the railroad. He guarded the prisoners that helped build the railroad up the mountain. And he said when the train came up a mountain, said, you better get up out of the way, said, there ain't no telling which way that thing would go if it got off of them rails.
Well, the claim it's made and advertised that we're the steepest railroad grade, mainline railroad grade in the United States. And that's a moniker that's been hung on Saluda, and we try to capitalize on it.
But they had to have 3 men, well, really 4. They had 3 8-hour shifts, but they had an extra one.
The train always had to stop here in town, where they set the manual brakes on each car, and the brakeman would start from the caboose, and maybe a fireman would start from the front, and they'd walk toward each other. They had these wheels to set the brakes.
So at one time, just about everybody that lived in the town limits here worked for the railroad. And it was not a bad job for them.
And then they would go off down the mountain, or the train would sit here for maybe an hour. And there wasn't that much supervision at the time. I never worried about a railroad detective running me off the train. It was just something you did, because this was a small town, very little to do for young boys. So we'd ride down the railroad to Melrose. We knew the train was going to stop because they had to go back and unhook the brakes. And then we'd wait on another freight to come back up.
And then as it got advertised for summer people, they started coming and buying property and building houses. They had 5 passenger trains, and they all stopped here. The old Carolina Special was the one branch of it started in Charleston, and the other one started over in Statesville, North Carolina. Got to Asheville and they combined it, and it kept the combined train till it got to Junction City, Kentucky, and the Cincinnati branch went off that way, and the St. Louis branch went through Louisville to St. Louis. But it was quite famous. Probably the last one they operated was the Carolina Special.
The fiddle and banjo are the core of the Mountain String Band and the symbol of Blue Ridge music. They reflect the unique cultural stew that defined the region in the 18th and 19th centuries, the influx of white settlers into the Blue Ridge, primarily of English, German, and Scotch-Irish descent, and the African American and Cherokee cultures that added their own ingredients to the stew. The Europeans brought the fiddle to North America during the 1700s, while the West Africans brought the banjo. The name Saluda, incidentally, comes from the Cherokee language, meaning green corn place or corn river. One well-known Saluda fiddler was William Morris, a direct descendant of early settlers. To the townfolk, Billy Morris was known for devoting his life to 3 things: his dog, his fiddle, which was always nearby, and the upkeep of what was known near and far as the century-old fire.
My dad took me down to see him at his old log cabin, and the fire, I didn't know what it's all about, but I remember the fire was still going at that time, and I was about 4 or 5 years old.
Everybody called him Uncle Billy Morris.
Okay.
And I remember that it'd been there so long, it was just a kind of a bowl burned out down in the ground.
For 164 years, 4 generations of the Morris family, ending with Billy, kept a fire going in the Holbert Cove area near Saluda that was called the oldest fire in the world. The original chunk of wood was laid in 1780, Morris told writers in the 1930s and 40s.
My dad took me down there. I must have been about 5, I guess, 5 or 6.
The Morris' fire became so famous that Billy was asked to appear on a national radio show out of New York City, and his story was written in newspapers across the country.
And I remember going in, and like he said, the fire, it was kind of warm, but he had just the coals going in it.
Yeah.
The fireplace was just hollowed out, and he had a dog. It looked mostly like a collie, and that old dog was laying by the fire. And Daddy asked him, there was a fiddle hanging on the wall, and my daddy asked him if he'd play us a tune, and he got that fiddle down and played that fiddle.
Ed Leland of Saluda took Morris to New York City in 1937 for the radio show We the People. He talked a few minutes and played a fiddle on the radio, Leland said.
Mr. Morris went to that program. They paid his expenses, and some relative took care of the fire while he was away.
On that show, Morris said, "I live alone in a little log cabin back in the hills of Saluda, North Carolina. I've got a little piece of ground, a cow, 4 pigs, and a horse. The fire has to be handled with real skill and care. I cover it with ashes, and during the day there's a softly glowing brand resting on a bed of red-hot ashes, and it doesn't give off a bit of smoke. After the chores are done at night, I come and stir up the fire till it's a-blazing, and then I sit down before it, and I can see in the flames my mother and father, my grandparents and my great-grandparents who started it burning. Sometimes I sit with my old fiddle and play to it." Then Morris played Bonaparte's Retreat to a national listening audience. Lola Ward of Saluda was part of that listening audience. She remembered the radio program that day. "It was on a Sunday, and the family and neighbors all gathered around to hear the show," she said. "He had a great big beautiful dog that grieved itself to death for him while he was in New York." Simp Thompson of Saluda also remembers Morris and his dog Booker T. Thompson lived farther out Holbert Cove Road than Morris and passed his house on the way to and from town. "He was a peculiar old bachelor who wore overalls all the time and played a good old-time fiddle," Thompson recalled. "The dog would bark while he played the fiddle. On Saturdays and Sundays, the road would be full of people to see the fire. He kept a flat little box with a slit in the top of it. People would give him money and bring him things." Morris died in 1944 at age 84 and was buried in the Friendship Baptist Church Cemetery. A cousin, Ida Owens, and her husband Hampton took over the fire for a while. Local residents say it was only a short time after his death before the fire went out. But the sounds of the fiddle didn't fade away with the passing of Billy Morris and his family's fire. One other local fiddler was known for making them, too. Pauline Korn recalls memories of her grandfather, Marion Gordon, entertaining her family late into the evening.
Grandpa made fiddles for as long as I could remember, and he gave me the last one that he made, and my daughter has that in a case that my husband made for her.
watermelon and I can't get home. Down in North Carolina.
Grandpa was always so handy with his hands. He and Granny, he didn't work out anywhere. He didn't hold a job. He farmed. They had a few cattle and a few pigs and thus and so. Grandpa and Granny made things. Grandpa he just decided that he could do fiddles, he calls them. And he did, and he played like crazy on those. He thought I would play. Before he gave me the last one he made, he ordered me a songbook. Now you can learn. Well, I wasn't interested in playing or singing. No, never have been, never can, never will. He just played for us, and oh yeah, when the grandkids would come on Saturday night and spend the night, Mom and Daddy'd be at the store, and I'd be with them, and Uncle Jesse's kids would come and all, and we wanted Grandpa to play the fiddle.
Music was truly homemade in Saluda, and the local fiddles made their way to the various dances and other events throughout the town. But something else had been made that changed everyone's access to entertainment. Technology had slowly advanced on the townspeople, with one gentleman who was handy with electronics. He collected new and used radio parts and had assembled something at a filling station in the center of town.
Your daddy was a paint contractor.
He was a painter, an electrician, and he built, from parts that he ordered, he built the first radio that was ever in Saluda or anywhere around. And he'd laugh and tell how the old people would come to town on the weekend and come in his service station to hear the radio. They wanted to see that radio. And some of them, he said, even got up. They'd go around and look behind the counter because they thought somebody was hiding back there talking. They couldn't believe it. And then, of course, things like the World Series or something like that, boy, they'd crowd in there and listen to it.
This thing was published in 1834. It's got 500 little songs in here, and number one is Brethren, We've Met to Worship. That's number 15 in our hymn book today. And it's word for word, just like it was back then. Brethren, we have met to worship and adore the Lord our God. Will you pray with all your power while we try to preach the word?
This is not melodramatic or anything. It's just something that happened. The Almighty told me one day, you can read music, but I want you to write a hymn. I said, well, I don't know where to start. And there was no words spoken. It was back and forth in my mind. And it says, you start by picking up a paper and a pencil. I picked up a paper and a pencil before I knew it. I had two verses, words and music. But I couldn't get the third verse. And I asked him one night, what happened to my third verse? Is this something I just thought I should do and I was wrong? And I went to bed and I woke up at about 3 o'clock. I wasn't hurting. I had no reason to wake up. No problem, nothing. So, but on the wall was the third verse. I wrote it down went back to sleep in 5 minutes. And the next day I got the 4th verse. He gave me the name, the title, the music, and the words. Eternity is just a heartbeat away, is the name of it. And the 3rd verse I will never forget. If you know the Master not, and he lives not in your heart, don't wait any longer to seek him ere you depart. But do not forget, as you travel each day, eternity is just a heartbeat away.
'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fear.
Our local churches here, Fort Creek, Piney Road, Grace, Mountain Page, Macedonia, Mountain Valley, Friendship, Saluda First Baptist. Music was such a great big part of that, and still is today. And when I, in my church, as the song leader at Fort Creek, I see these little kids, under 10 years old, singing along to these great old songs that I grew up and singing. It really makes me feel good to know, that we're carrying on these traditional gospel songs.
There will be a happy meeting in heaven, I know, when we see the many loved ones we've known here below. Gather on the blessed hilltops with hearts all aglow. That will be a glad reunion day.
Music was always part of our lives, in churches especially, in the choirs. My dad and my mom always sang, my family, we always sang a lot of these old gospel songs, a lot of them that Adja wrote, and there was a lot of songwriters in my family too. If you grew up in Saluda, one of the most important types of music was always gospel music, and especially in the old days when they were poor, it gave them hope, it gave them comfort, it gave them strength. And every Sunday in church they had this music. Everybody in these churches, they sang well. They knew how to read shape note music, which they taught. This particular book right here, I've counted 10 Saluda songwriters in this book, including my uncle James W. Metcalf, Herbert Pace, Oscar Pace, Early Staten, which was a good friend of Adja Pace's. Now Adja Pace, believe it or not, he wrote so many great gospel songs. A lot of people in Southern gospel music have recorded his songs, and they've become hits down through the years. The most famous TV show in the Southern gospel music genre was Happy Jubilee. He wrote the theme song for that. Bob Dylan has recorded a song of his. Doc Watson has. Even the Judds recorded his Christmas song, Beautiful Star of Bethlehem, as Emmylou Harris has. And Dora Lawson and bluegrass music. His songs have been recorded by many, many people down through the years. But he always called Saluda home. And in my dad's generation, those that grew up in the 40s and 50s would look forward to every year when he would come back to Saluda. He stayed in local families' homes, and he would teach a singing school at Mountain Page Baptist Church. And at their homecoming day, he would sing and perform. And one person told me that you never saw a car in Saluda with fancy chrome wheels until Adja Pace came to town. He'd come in these fancy, but my dad talked about hearing him sing growing up in the 50s, and so it was really interesting. He was a celebrity, to people in Saluda, especially in the gospel music genre.
When we've lived a million years in that wonderful place, basking in the love of Jesus, beholding his face, it will seem but just a moment of praising his face. That will be a glad reunion day.
Old-time music, different than bluegrass, is also often called mountain music. Different mountain regions have different styles and accents. Maybe the mountains themselves affect the sound of the songs. Some claim the windy roads around here add twists and curves to the tunes. Others notice the smooth flow of Appalachian music matches the smooth, worn-down topography of some of the oldest mountains on Earth.
The music that we play is called old-time music, and as the name implies, it is music that really originates from the early settlers of the mountains in the 17th and 18th centuries. We generally consider it to be Civil War or pre-Civil War music. Is traditional or public domain music. Nobody wrote these tunes. They're passed down from fiddler to fiddler mostly. It's different from bluegrass. Bluegrass was an invented genre of music that put together old-time music with other types of music, blues and African music. And old-time music is the traditional music that predates bluegrass music. One of the differences that you'll hear about old-time music is that there's no lead taking by the instruments.
Well, you know, the old-time music is everywhere in the United States. It's just different. In New England, they got this kind of Celtic flavor to it because they never used the banjo. Down here, we have a more better flavor because we got banjo in it, and it makes it swing more because the banjo makes the music swing, and it opens up the fiddle, and you can't play that kind of bagpipey sound to get up north.
It's mostly instrumental. There are some singing tunes, but the fiddle plays the melody, and the banjo plays the melody or dances around the melody, and the bass and the guitar play rhythm. And there's no leads, there's no improvisation, and the fiddle essentially plays the melody the same way each time, round and round and round, just like you would at a dance.
So that's what divides it, and the dividing line is actually roughly just a little north of the Mason-Dixon line, and it goes west, and you get out west, and as the roads get straighter and the hills get flatter, they get more of a streamlined kind of music out there because they don't live in the hills and they don't play music in the hills. In North Carolina, West Virginia, and Virginia, they got these crookedy tunes because they live in these crookedy places. You can't just go from Saluda to Tryon without wiggling.
Well, as I said, I think it gives you kind of permission to take your time. You know, I think as opposed to the Rockies, where where you really have to kind of attack, that environment to really get the most out of it. Well, here, it's kind of laid back. And I think that has to do with the geology of the area and just how things are just kind of smoothed over.
There's an interesting story that has to do with music with my great-grandparents. This is a picture of my great-grandfather, George Washington Metcalf, who was born in 1854. And in this picture, it was taken at the time that he was a prison guard over the convicts that built the Saluda Railroad. You can see the badge here on his lapel. But his wife and him lived in this house right here, up on the Fort Creek community, right near where I live at. And we found recently a real interesting story about a man named John Jacob Niles. John Jacob Niles was considered the dean of the modern folk music movement. He went around through the Appalachian Mountains, a lot of it was in Kentucky, and visited old mountain people and had them sing folk songs for him, which he recorded and wrote down on paper. And in 1934, he went to visit my great-grandmother, Selina Middleton Metcalf, and also her husband, George Washington Metcalf. They were on the porch, according to his story, weaving a basket. And he asked her to sing a song, and she had a song called The Murdered Brother. They later put it in his book here called The Ballad Book of John Jacob Niles, which was published in 1960. And this book is quite a well-known book for people that collected old folk ballads and stuff like that. But it talks about the story of him visiting them. It talks about fox hunting, which the song mentions also. It happens that a year after this visit took place, Selena died. So it was one of her, one of the last things, and able to remember her story in future generations through this book. The song is about a mother asking her son, why he's got blood on his clothes. And his first excuse was, it's the blood of a skinny greyhound that traced the fox for me. And she said, that's too gray for a greyhound blood. I didn't know that there was a difference in the color of blood, but according to this song. And then he makes up a different excuse. He said, no, that's from the blood of the old gray mare that plowed the corn for me. So she says then that blood's too red for a mare's blood. So then he confesses that it is the blood of her youngest son, his brother, which he killed. And so he confessed to her and told her that, and she asked why did he kill him? And it's kind of a hard to understand line, but it said it was over a wand, a withy wand that would never become a tree. And then of course he explains that he's going to have to go across the sea with his wife and escape, what the perils that come. And a song called The Murdered Brother.
Come and tell me, I'll leave him dead, and I waited to wonder what comes of his mammy and me. What comes of his mammy and me?
Saluda, I don't know if it's still true today, but at one time scientists had said that Saluda had one of the cleanest air qualities in the world due to some kind of position with the ozone layer, but that's where they celebrate the ozone, is because some scientists had found that one time. They said there was one town in Italy that had cleaner air than Saluda did at the time this study was done.
See, Dr. Smith, back in the early 1900s, found out that this was a good place to bring children that were sick, and he had a major hospital here.
Well, see, the Spartanburg Baby Hospital was a charity hospital, but Dr. Smith's hospital was a private hospital. But he was CEO of both of them. He had interns that were here with him too, and they would make the calls. They would make the rounds over to Baby Hospital, Spartanburg Baby Hospital, with him, and learn by watching him and observing him. There's a man in Hendersonville, Fletcher Roberts. When he was a baby or a little child, the doctors there in Elsie and Asheville could not do him any good. Quote, he was not getting any better. And his parents brought him to Dr. Smith, and he started getting well. And he's now 80 years old and doing well. So Dr. Smith's efforts lasted there. The Spartanburg Baby Hospital was on the hill just over from Main Street. You could hear the babies crying from Main Street when they were crying, yeah. And so in Dr. Smith's hospital was up here on Smith Hill. The thing I remember was these seminars, when all that flock of doctors came in. Sometimes there were more doctors here for the seminar than the rest of the population put together. And they spread out all over town. And back in those days, we had about 3 or 4 square inches every week. And I had the great privilege of teaching a lot of people to square dance. And many of the doctors came over there, and I lined them up and got them started square dancing. The young girls came up here for the summer, and of course it was my delight to teach them to square dance too. And one time one of them asked me, said, "What do you do up here in the winter time? It must be awfully dull." I said, "Well, no, we work harder in the winter time than we do in the summertime." "Well, what on earth do you do?" I said, "Figure out ways to separate you from your money when you come in the summertime."
Summer girls were just, that was like heaven. They would come up here starting usually in June after school was out. A few would spend a good part of the summer, but a lot of them came for a week or 2 weeks. And they would bring their girlfriends. So there's always a little conflict between the local girls and the summer girls.
Saluda's population increased by about 50% in the summertime.
People had summer homes up here from Columbia, Greenville, Spartanburg, Charleston, that they'd had in their family for years, and they would come up here and spend all summer. And the grandmas owned the houses, but the granddaughters came up here. And I remember all the good-looking summer girls that would come. I couldn't wait to go to square dancing with all the summer girls.
Well, they attended the square dances, and when we were little boys, we were always glad to see the summer people came because they brought new girls to Saluda.
The boys would all think they were the greatest things that ever was.
Yeah, biggest competition you all had.
That's right.
Yeah, new blood.
New blood, that's right.
The Saluda girls were not very happy when the summer girls arrived.
And one of the things that the local girls would say, well, it's June, and we're getting out of school, I'm going to tell you goodbye, because I know you won't speak to me again till spring, till September. That was the joke, because that wasn't entirely true, but there was a little truth to it.
4 Ogden sisters. Our home up on Pine Street, the big house, we call it, or the White House, they would come play ping pong with us one night of the week. And I'm sure Nikki and Mimi had their time when the boys would come up and play ping pong at your house. We still have the same ping pong table, and they'd still come up, and then the next night they would go see another set of summer girls. And it was the one, I can't think of her name, up on Judd's Peak.
Llewellyn Bellamy.
The Bellamy sisters. So then they go to the Bellamy sisters the next night, and there's nowhere else they would go. But the Saluda boys were adorable.
The summer people, they tended to spend more time with their own societies. They knew each other. They had common friends. They were more apt to having summer tea parties and little beer or wine drinking soirees in the afternoon. The locals didn't do that. They were out working. Nikki was the oldest of the Ogden daughters. She had a younger sister by the name of Mimi, who is deceased, but Mimi and I were the same age, and Nikki was maybe a couple of years older. And they were fun girls to dance with. It didn't matter who the person was, the guys, or how much body odor they had. They had just as big a time dancing with them as anybody else. They never seemed to reflect that social status separation.
There were a lot of summer girls that the parents did not want them to be involved with the Saluda boys. Absolutely not. And one of them is a friend of mine. I know her today, and she said, "You dated the Saluda boys?"
I had 2 or 3 summertime girlfriends, but I was restricted to going to their house and sitting on the porch. couldn't take them out. Or maybe there was a swing out in the yard. But along about 9 or 10 o'clock, the mother would come and say, call the girl by name. You know what time it is? It's getting awfully late. It may be 9 or 10 o'clock. And you'd go home.
I shouldn't tell you this probably, but I was just a poor, ignorant country boy, and no girl in high school gave me a second look, so I must have smelled bad. But anyway, there was plenty of opportunities there in the summer to hitch up, you know, with a summer girl.
Bobby Whitaker called us tourists. Bobby, we've been coming forever. How can we be a tourist?
There was very little contact between the summer people and the local people on a social level, except for the square dances. And that's where both societies met and had a good time.
Well, square dancing, mountain square dancing, been going on, Lord, since the 30s. And I guess the #1 tune that people liked the best in mountain square dancing was a tune called Down Yonder. It was written by Wolf Green in 1921. And you've heard it on everything from the Lawrence Welk Show on down, but for mountain square dancing and clogging, everybody loved Down Yonder. But now we done 20 or 30, 40 more songs, but they would ask for Down Yonder. And the old tune was pretty simple, but it had a good beat to it, and it went kind of like this.
Apparently dances have been going on here forever. They were just back into the...
Somebody named the Johnson Brothers started it, or maybe back.
Well, if you go back to when they started, if you read the old paper they had, her great-grandfather was an Episcopal minister here, and he's the one that started this square dance.
Folk dancing in Saluda, and this was 1938. And they would start out with circle left, everybody shouts the caller, and the hilarious crowd moves spiritedly to do his bidding, and the banjos strum, the lights are brightened, and the square dance is underway. And they used to have lessons twice a week for square dances, and this was back pre-40s. This was published in 38, and they'd have, and the men could go to the dances, and they had to pay 50 cents, but ladies were free.
I lived here all my life, and as Hilda said, we went to the pavilion and learned how to square dance. And he had several different things there in the pavilion for kids, you know. And then I started coming over here, well, when I was a teenager.
It was the music that was so wonderful, because it was not electric music at that time.
And then another one they liked would be Under the Double Eagle.
My earliest knowledge of square dancing was that the gym here was used on Fridays, and they had a dance. I was a youngster and too young to dance. Wasn't sure. I wanted to know how. But we had another building in town where they had a kids square dance. And when you outgrew that, then you were ready to come over here and be a part of the big dance.
That old library had a library upstairs, and then they had a place downstairs where you could have dances. And Mrs. Gertrude Kirk, and Jane Hallman decided to start dances so the little ones, meaning us, could learn how to dance. And that's when I remember we would be visiting the Hallmans, and then Mother would say, start taking your clothes off so you can get dressed fast for the square dance.
They had a pavilion up here where the pavilion is now. It was an enclosed pavilion. And that's where they had the square dances on Friday night for the little kids.
But it was real shabby and about to fall in, but hey.
My mama said I started dancing when I was 2 years old. I don't remember that, but I do remember square dancing in that pavilion every Friday night during the summer.
There were no windows except where you would lift up the wooden slats and hang them from the sides, and the music was on a record player, the 78 RPMs.
On Friday night, we didn't have a band. We had a jukebox down at the pavilion.
And we would play games up there, and Fred Aiken was such a card. He loved to be in charge, and he was funny, and he would play, what was the song? What's that game when you have to stop? Red light, green light. We'd play red light, green light, and then we'd play musical chairs, where they'd take a chair out every time, and the music stopped. And the music stopped, you had to find a seat, and whoever didn't find one was out. You know, and all you did was win, and maybe you got to lead off the next dance or something like that. It was just such innocent fun.
The dancing was just part of life back then, and I'm sorry that it went by the wayside.
And the bands, I mean, the Bob Ponder band came, Buddy Davis band came, I mean, that was the music back then.
And 2 or 3 guys could clog, and they'd have these cloggers on their shoes. I know Ray, one of the Johnson boys, I can't remember him, but he loved to clog.
Throw the wildwood flower in if you had the right beat.
I started school in 1942. So, I asked a lady, knowing I was coming here today, what the first recollection she could give, and she went to school here too. And she gave me a name, and I asked her to write it down for me. His name was Lionel Wrightson. He was the first caller in the 1930s. And that's as far back as I've been able to trace the beginning of the dances.
Bob Johnson was the caller that was here regular when I started dancing here, and then Bob took it up, and but those two, Bob Whitaker and Bob Johnson, were the two that I learned to dance under.
It was just a lot of fun, and it's just something you look forward to doing. It was not in competition with football games or anything, because we had in the summer when school was out and before school started back. That's when the square dances were held. And
square dancing was different here in Saluda. You go to jump off a mountain in Hendersonville. They would have a few different moves, go down to Lake Lure.
But with all that said, we still was the granddaddy. We pulled the biggest crowd of any of them consistently.
I didn't even go to school here. I went to school in Hendersonville. And you just dance with the people you grew up with. My favorite was to dance with Lloyd Thompson. He was a huge man, tall, big man, but he had a lot of rhythm. And I loved to dance with him and my dad.
There was a couple that led the square dances here for me for years. They called him Bear Moore, as his nickname, him and his wife. And they led the square dances, every one of them. But Bear was a dead serious person, and he wanted that square dance run just like an army marching. It's like when we'd say big ring and let's go left, he wanted that ring absolutely perfect. He didn't want no zigzagging in and out.
The circle was so big it would take up the whole floor. And you'd swing your corner lady all the way around. It'd take about 10 minutes to get around the circle.
Well, it started out big ring, go left. Then halfway back. Then right hand, breaking, hold on.
You could holler big ring and let's go left. Well, the ring would start around, well, they'd run it in and run it out and zigzag it around, you know, just laughing, having a big time.
I love dancing with the mountain men.
They knew how to dance, and they could really swing you. Woo.
Then when you swang the girl that you wanted to dance with the next dance, you hoped you got to her so you could ask her, you know.
Okay, it would always start out, big ring, go left. Halfway back, you go the other way. Then you may swing your corner lady all the way around. So you swing every girl around that. And then you get back to your partner and you promenade.
Well, going around in a circle and doing all the different moves and learning the shoe fly swing. Do you know what the shoe fly swing is?
I don't love nobody, nobody don't love me. Always sitting fancy free. I don't love nobody, nobody don't love me. I don't love nobody, nobody don't love me.
Then break into two couples, everybody holding hands, and then do the right hand over, left chains. Do the double Georgia. That was another big. That was a biggie.
And then the bunny hop was big. Y'all know what the bunny hop is? Lord, we'd have to play it. I've seen them all the way around this thing 3 or 4 times a night.
Bob Whitaker, he played the music. He usually had the bands.
Bobby Whitaker?
He wasn't. He was cute.
Gorgeous.
I was nervous, and I looked at some, and I'd see who they danced with, and I'd kind of compare myself to them, you know, and try to make them think I was more than just another pretty face and that they ought to dance with me, and they'd say yes.
It was awfully hot in the gymnasium. Sweat would pour off you when you square danced. Everybody was soaking wet, even the girls. But nobody seemed to care. And between sets of dances, people would go outside and sit on those rock steps by the school to try to cool off. Now, that was the only private moment you had with those girls, if you were a local. Because their mothers or fathers or aunts or grandmothers, somebody was hovering around to make sure there was no contamination of the seeds. Okay?
Now down yonder, someone beckons to me. Down yonder, looking for Robert. Right over, how do you do? I left hand, how are you? Swing that corn finger. All right, yeah. Now you're a honey baby. On you go, big ring. Let's do it again.
Oh, break and swing your corner lady and promenade. Everybody promenades around in a circle. Then you break into fours, which is two couples, and you hold hands, and you go right, then left, halfway back, right hands over, left chains, ladies step through, and little boys too, you do a little.
For some reason in the late 60s, it kind of died out for some reason. I think it was because neither the Lions Club or the fire department was interested enough to keep them going.
Well, you say, why did I quit? Everybody's got a story. In 1985, that was the last year I run them, my wife and son got killed in a plane crash. I was standing there waiting for the next ride. It was right up here at this little airport in Hendersonville. And it crashed on takeoff, and there wasn't nobody around there but me. It caught on fire when it crashed. I got the pilot and the 9-year-old boy out, but I couldn't get to my wife and son. They was on the other side, and it was a ball of fire. And I was single about 4 years, and my wife now, Linda, was from up Lake Toxaway, and her husband had passed away, and she was managing DuPont Credit Union, which I was working there too. So about a year later, like a long story short, her husband had passed away. Then her brother had got killed on a front end loader. We all got stories. But then me and her got married, and we've been married, what, 26 years? Mm-hmm. And then after everything calmed down, the principal over there called me and wanted to do some more because they was getting a percent of it for the athletic program. And we run some part-time for a couple of years, but then on top of that, to show you how square dancing is not feasible anymore, down here in Columbus, North Carolina, here in Polk County, they begged us to go down there in that old gym and try to bring square dancing back. Stern's Gym there in Columbus. We went down there and tried it for 3 or 4 months. Well, you couldn't get nobody. It's just a lost art, and the young people don't want to learn it.
And that's where the fan disappeared.
Saturday night we went to the gym. That was the highlight of the whole thing. I mean, all summer long, you just couldn't wait for Friday night and Saturday night to go square dances. And you didn't plan nothing else them 2 nights. I mean, it was that much fun. I loved it. Still love square dancing.
Just had fond memories of dancing with pretty girls. Now this is a true story. George Johnson was one of the primary coon hunters around this area. And the coons had been basically depleted. And they needed to replenish their stock. So the idea came about to have a community picnic, raise funds to go to Florida and Louisiana to buy more coon to bring in here. But the rest of the good story was they collected some money, called my 2 brothers in Leesburg, Florida, and one of my older brothers happened to know where they could access some raccoons. 3 or 4 of them went down there, and there was a teenage boy as part of the entourage. They got down there, bought these raccoons, and started back north. Got to the Florida-Georgia line, and a highway patrol was waiting for them. They had been reported, they were transporting raccoons illegally with no permit, because I guess they had to be quarantined. Or maybe it was the sheriff. But anyhow, they confiscated all those raccoons and put these guys in jail. And they didn't have any money with them. Couldn't make bail. So the sheriff allowed one of them to come back to Saluda and collect enough money to take back down there to get the others out of jail. Then they lost all their raccoons and paid those fines, and that was the start of the Coon Dog.
If you were black, your place was with your own people because you had no privileges. We were not privileged to do all the things that they did.
Pearlie Mae Suber Harris recalls a different experience in Saluda than most who took part in the square dances and Coon Dog days. She, like other African Americans throughout western North Carolina, suffered the violence and second-class status of the Jim Crow laws of the day.
So we're talking about late 40s and early 50s when there were no privileges. There were no privileges. If you walked downtown and people approached you on the little street in Saluda, you moved over so they could get by.
But she and her family found joy in each other and raising farm animals, and even playing with Carl Sandburg's daughters for a time, and above all, singing. Her father was a much-respected Baptist reverend at St. Matthew's Church in Saluda, and they were part of a quartet that would sing there and the nearby Sullivan Temple Church, and at churches in Tryon, Hendersonville, Asheville, and Biltmore. The entire congregation would sing, including shape note or do-re-mi songs, which were in the backs of the old hymnals and could be sung whether you read music or not.
Do, 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 mi, re, do, so, mi, so, mi, do, so, mi, do. and the notes moving up and down, up and down. And they could do that for any song. And I thought that was amazing.
My God is standing by.
The music was completely different from the music that they're singing in churches now. Because I can remember so well, It's Just As I Am, that Billy Graham always sang, Amazing Grace, the old Rugged Cross. And I used to love that song. I thought it was so pretty. On a hill far away stood an old rugged cross and the emblem of suffering and pain. It goes on and on and on. And then I used to love if my daddy sang, get a little oil in your vessel and your lamp trimmed and burning, and be ready when the bridegroom comes. Get a little oil in your vessel and your lamps trimmed and burning, and be ready when the bridegroom comes.
My Lord, and don't despair, for he...
And Negro spirituals were very, very popular when we were going, go down, Moses, way down in Egypt's land, tell old Pharaoh, let my people go. You still sing all these songs in the back of your head. Amazing Grace, I think we sing that almost every Sunday. It was always a lot of fun for us as children because that's what we heard at home. You heard, most of it was Christian music and most of it was gospel music. And there were so many gospel singers. I can remember after the Sullivan Temple was built, the Clara Ward singers came here and they had gorgeous music. Mahalia Jackson was here. And this lady was singing then the songs that you don't hear anymore. Precious Lord, take my hand, lead me on, let me stand, and so on and so forth. And I wish I had the voice to sing all these songs again. We went in the stores and shopped for what little shopping we needed, and Daddy had an account at Pace's, at the A&G store, and I don't think it ever went over $10, but that was a lot of money back then. I don't know where a lot of things came from, but the people were really nice to us, and I think that was because of my father, because my father was really a great man. He really was. And if there was a history to be written about him, they would say that about him.
God is standing by. All you have to do is call him. He's standing by.
And I think this is what time does. It takes us in one direction, and then the direction changes, and it brings us back.
Of course, some folks in town had an entirely different background in music. One of them was among the most popular singers and television stars of the 20th century.
Perry Como used to walk by the house all the time. And I think what Perry Como liked about Saluda is that the people of Saluda didn't bother him. One of the stories that I heard about Perry Como, he was down at Nolan Pace's, the service station next door. It was the Western Auto and also the service station. He was down there one day and Nolan was busy, so Perry went out there and pumped the gas in the car. He asked him, said, would you like for me to clean your windshield? It was a pretty new Cadillac. He said, yes, sir, you can clean my windshield. He said, would you like for me to check your oil? And he said, sir, I have you know my car never used oil. So he gave him a $20 bill. That was when gas was, cheap. Went in there and gave it to Nolan. Nolan gave him the change, and he came back out there and handed it to him. And the man never knew Perry Como had just pumped his gas. And when Miss Ward was 100 years old, Perry Como called her and sang happy birthday to her. And Miss Ward says, well, Perry, I didn't know you could sing.
He goes fast,
He goes slow, he goes left, she goes right.
And how is Saluda's cultural scene in the early 21st century? By most accounts, it is in the midst of a bit of a renaissance, with a growth in population and commerce that has increased the number of gathering places for folks, including restaurants and events that provide live music as the focal point. The Purple Onion, the Saluda Grade Cafe, the Party Place and Events Center, the Top of the Grade Summer Series, and the Saluda Arts Festival are but a few of the venues that host music. The artist that embodies this growth the most is Saluda native Aaron Burdett, a singer-songwriter who blends Americana and rock, and who grew up while the town, like the square dances, had slowed down by the 1980s and ran the risk of closing one too many of its doors. The opening of Interstate 26, diverting traffic from Main Street downtown, dealt perhaps the biggest blow.
It's over and it's all gone like dry oak, up in flames, up in flames, up in flames. How many times?
But, like other towns in western North Carolina, Saluda is growing once again and trying to find that balance between holding on to the past and moving forward towards the future. I gotta say, after having moved to Saluda, it's a small town. It was perfectly situated for my needs of in between Asheville, where I'd been living, where you guys live, such a vibrant cultural scene, and then here in Spindale, where I worked, and just this great headquarters here. Saluda, right in between, beautiful town, and formed a family there. But to have you living in Saluda, here's this guy that we like to play him on our radio station, and he lives just a stone's throw from me. It was great.
We can say today we can weather any storm.
Have you noticed there's a really nice up-and-coming kind of group of us, sort of our generation. We're raising kids now. You just had a kid. I've got an 8-year-old, and they all go to the same elementary school that was hosting these square dances since back in the 40s and stuff. And I guess when you have kids or you meet a couple friends and other friends, you notice that there's sort of like a little circle, a little community. And I feel like our generation or whatever is really kind of taken on a nice kind of strong foothold in Saluda.
Who's walked the earth, any length of time's been hurt. That's just the way we're meant to learn.
I think there are a lot more young people and young families there than there were. I think there are people moving there for, I think there's work there. There's, there's stuff going on that there wasn't when I was a kid.
A little bit of lesson, a little bit of life.
It really was kind of a dead period. It seems like in the 80s.
And I don't mean to say that it was dead because I may just not have known what was going on. I mean, I will say downtown was nothing like it is now.
But it's bound to teach us that we can weather any storm.
This is my opinion, but I think that the mountain music scene, the roots music scene, it wasn't exactly one of the most powerful and strongest decades for the music. Certainly it was still there. There was an infrastructure that remained, but it kind of, it kind of got consumed by other stuff, the 80s pop or whatever.
We can weather any storm. Weather any storm.
And And like the square dancing scene that was big in Saluda, that kind of died down in the 80s. It was like strong as can be there at Saluda School, but then by the 80s, I guess it just couldn't compete anymore. Square dancing fell out of fashion. Generation gaps became wider, I think, during that time. So if your parents did do it, you were less likely to want to do it. Whereas in the 50s and 60s, it didn't matter so much if your parents liked it. You might still like it as well.
There'll be no stopping us now, 'cause we reason now that together we can weather any storm.
Burdett here on WNCW, wrapping up this session with that tune of his, and with Jackson Delaney on the lap steel, and Jeff Hinkle on the bass, and James Kylan on the drums.
Hello, 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 our voice and music rings. It's sweeter than the whippoorwill let in the woodland sing.
We're only 700 people in Saluda, and there's a reverence for these beautiful mountains. But there's also a vibrancy here. Over the years, music has come and gone in different venues.
And all I have is my own experience, but Saluda, when I was, 10, 12, in early teens, that was through the 80s, basically.
Yeah.
And my experience was there wasn't a whole lot going on there. The downtown was really depressed. There wasn't, there were very few, shops, and there were no restaurants to speak of. That's not true. The grill's always been there, but
I remember when 17 buildings were empty in Saluda. 17 buildings right here in town were empty. Nobody were here after the interstate was built.
There was, a couple general stores, and there was the Western Auto and your odd antique or small gift shop or something. But the community didn't support that sort of thing when I was a kid.
My wife and I have been married 38 years, and I had told her about this really neat town, and I wanted to bring her here. In the meantime, the interstate highway had been built, and the community had just about bit the dust. A lot of the businesses were closed. There weren't too many stores open. It was just a grim time. And some of the locals just sort of put on their own boots and said, we're going to save this town. And at the same time, a lot of people from outside started seeing and appreciating the quaintness of this little community. We have a little downtown area that's intact, trying the same way. I brought her up here, and she was so depressed, and I was depressed too because I'd seen what happened. But then over the years, more and more outsiders came in and saved this community.
I see it losing tradition. I see it changing. Other than Pace's store here, there's not a lot that is the original Saluda that I grew up and knew in. And there's a lot of, in me being part of the Polk County History organization, a lot of times history is rewritten in the wrong way, and it's not true to what it really used to be. This store right here was, to my generation, it was where we came and we got candy, and it was, locally owned, family owned, and just a good home place, and you don't see a lot of, you see a lot of Saluda disappearing, really, as far as the lifestyle that Saluda used to be.
If you go up and down the street and check the shopkeepers, I only know of 2 who are originally local, and I'm one of them. They've all been saved or brought in by outsiders. And of course, there's a conflict with the locals who want it to be like it was when they were growing up.
I hope it stays the same.
But it's going to change. It's already changed.
Well, I don't know how much more it can change unless they get a McDonald's down at the intersection, and then it'll have a Walmart and everything. But I hope that I'm not alive that day when that happens.
The people that come here, for some reason, they had a reason they liked it and wanted to come, and then it seems like as quick as they get here, they want to change it.
Yeah, well, I'll agree to that. I forgot that.
Why did you come in the first place? If you wanted something different, why didn't you go find it? Why? If you liked it enough to come here, maybe you should just leave it alone.
I always like to ask the question, well, do you want it like it was when I found it 38 years ago? Community was about to fold up. Is that what you're talking about, going back to the old times?
I can remember a few years back when one Saturday there was a concert going on over here.
Well, I can't think of a single thing to do.
And there was concert down the street.
Up our house, it's up on the hill. Won't you come join us sometime, Leslie will?
And there was live music in here, and I was like, wow.
We're proud of that.
Yeah, there's a lot going on here.
We're proud of that.
People are a little more forgiving. Like if you opened a restaurant in the middle of the city, you'd need to have all your ducks in a row, and people need to walk in the door and see everything's done.
Yeah.
When we opened this place, it was just gravel out in the patio, and when we had those summer showers, summer downpours, we had some little green plastic tables out there with umbrellas, and sometimes people would have to hop across streams of water running through the gravel to get to their table. But our customers were very forgiving and just sort of went with it. And as we grew, we made improvements. And
they're probably, if not at least one of the most successful businesses in this community, and has as much to do with saving the community as any of them. They bring people into Saluda. If they had to survive on the locals, they'd have been out of business a long time ago.
Oh, and made great friends. I mean, really, strong friendships throughout the years of people that come back, day in and day out. We've got people that come in here, 2 or 3 times a week, every week.
They attract the younger people or middle-aged people from all around this area.
There are now a lot of the business owners there, the Purple Onion, and those are all the people that are sort of my parents' age and friends that moved there in the 70s and 80s.
I mean, there are nights where we know 90% of the customers, and that's pretty special.
I will say that one of the things about the music that was very important was WNCW, and having that kind of lead the way as far as music is concerned.
I think I've advertised every show we've done since 2000, sometime in 2000.
Really important, having them in the background.
Started off with a local guy, still as a local guy, as local as you can get, just across the road or two from us in Saluda, North Carolina. It's Aaron Burdett.
I'm a bar stool poet on a Saturday night and a cottonmouth clown in the morning light. Feels like it's over, stark raving, so we're starting all over again.
This music industry, and you guys know better than anybody, it's just nuts. I mean, it's non-linear. It doesn't work out like it's not a merit-based thing. It's not. It's a combination of talent and luck and astrology. I have no idea, but it can be, for someone who's like myself, who's been trying for a long time. I mean, to be fair, I only think I've been I think it was sort of a hobby 10 years ago and has slowly morphed into much more than that. But it can be overwhelming.
These guys are really good. They're sweet folks. Give a warm salute of welcome for Teleco. To quote Anya Hinkle here from Asheville's band Teleco and another Asheville writer, Thomas Wolfe, you can't go home again. People come and go, traditions come and go, and your hometown changes with the times. But sometimes, a small town, tucked in the mountains and removed from the faster pace of change, can manage to maintain some of its original character over time. And well after the last train has left town, long after the century-old fire has gone out, years after the bustling square dances have become but a memory of a bygone time, Saluda continues to thrive. And so we've come full circle with regard to traditions. Or as Pearlie Mae Harris says about time, it takes us in one direction, and then the direction changes, and it brings us back. Perhaps you can go home again.
There's a well-beaten path on this old mountainside where I wandered when I was a lad. And I wandered along to the place I call home, and those Blue Ridge hills so far away. Oh, I love those hills of old Saluda. From those Blue Ridge hills I did roam. When I die, won't you bury me on a mountain far away in my Blue Ridge mountain home? Thoughts wander back to that ramshackle shack and those Blue Ridge hills far away, where my mother and dad were laid there to rest. They're sleeping in peace together there. Oh, I love those hills of old Saluda. From those Blue Ridge hills I did roam. When I die, won't you bury me on the mountain Mountain home. Return to that old cabin home with the sun. I've been longing for days gone by. When I die, won't you bury me on that old mountainside? Make my resting place upon the hill so high. Oh, I love those hills of old Saluda. From those Blue Ridge hills I did roam. When I die, won't you bury me on a mountain far away in my Blue Ridge Mountain home? Far away in my Saluda Mountain home.